This pot is filled with all of the tallow from the deer I got. It's also filled with all of the trimmings that I did off of every cut of meat that I either grinded or froze solid as an actual cut, either a steak or a roast. So it's got about, I'd say, close to 30 pounds of fat, and there's some meat in here as well. But I've got it, not quite enough water in here. I still have to put some more water in, but I've got 2 hot plates underneath this big pot. This is the pot that I brew in, and what I'm doing is I'm just letting it simmer. You can also do this in a crock pot. A crock pot actually works really well for this. You cook it on low for about 24 hours, and then you let it cool completely, and all the fat will rise to the top, obviously, and it'll solidify on top of the water that's inside the pan, and you can just scrape it off from there. You can also do this more than one time. The more that these fibers break down inside here, the more collagen and tallow is released from inside the cell. So what I'm going to do here is take this strainer, and I'm going to strain all this meat out, put it in this bucket. I'm then going to take this pot and dump the contents, the liquid contents, into this pitcher. Now you can do this in a couple of different ways, but the more vertical of the volume of container you have, the easier it's going to be in the next step, which is you'll just have to scrape off about the bottom ½ inch of this tallow once it sets up, and you can throw it back in the pot with your next mix. It's almost like we're distilling this mixture here. If I were to have gone with straight suet and put it in here, it would have made this process easier, but I wanted to try to get every ounce of it that I could, so I threw the trimmings in there as well from the meat. If you go with straight suet, the stuff that comes out of the internal area, that's actually where most of the lard comes from, is the visceral fat out of a pig. That's generally what they use for lard. Is there's a big strand of interior visceral fat that surrounds the organs and keeps those insulated. That's generally what they use lard from. If you remember from the dough video, there was a bunch of that fat around the tenderloins, and that would be the visceral fat on a deer. So I'm going to start scooping, putting it in here. I'm going to put the contents, the liquid contents, in this pitcher. I'm then going to put all the meat back into here and boil it again one more time for an additional day, and that'll help extract out the whatever is remaining in here. So with that being said, I'll get to it. There is a lot of fat in here. So once this sets up, you can already see the stratification starting to happen here. Right there, I've got about 2 inches already, and you can see that this is starting to settle out here. All the particulate matter is starting to settle. All the fat is starting to rise to the top. It's about 45 degrees today. When I come back later on, this will be a solid block of tallow. We have tallow. And all of that on the bottom, that brown, is the water that I boiled the tallow in. I'm going to take a knife, and I'm going to cut around the edge here, okay, and I'm going to pull that out just like a plug and set it in that. These are just the disposable Tupperware containers that I continue to reuse. Okay, you got to be careful when you're doing this, because if you press down too hard, all you're going to do is get all that water underneath this stuff, and it's pretty nasty under there. So I got my spoon under there. I'm just going to pull that cake out just like that. Now it's time for round 2. we should have another cake almost the size of that one there. And it looks like, based on preliminary looks, it's going to be the same size as that one. So I might end up with close to 6 pounds of tallow off of this. It's a lot of tallow, guys. This cake here is not quite as big as the last one, just like I kind of thought. I didn't think it was going to be quite as thick, but it's still pretty impressive. Alright, there's the thickness of the first cake. And there is the thickness of the second cake. Alright guys, should be the last boil here. Take my cakes. I got about 2 inches of water in the bottom of this pan, which will give the protein room to settle out from the tallow. This step here probably isn't completely necessary, but you can see on the bottom of these cakes there is a lot of protein intermingled with that. So I'm going to try to get out as much of that as I can by just boiling this or heating it up one more time. Alright, this here is just a grease screen that we use in the house to, you know, keep grease from splattering anytime we're having something in the frying pan there. I'm going to lay this over the top of this container, and this is the container that I'm going to put the bulk of the tallow in. And I'm going to put this container in the freezer, and I'll be able to keep it indefinitely. I am going to pour 1 candle. I wish I had a smaller tin. I've got some smaller glass jars, but I want something that isn't going to break. Not for when I pour it, but when I throw this in my bag. So here's my pot of tallow. I'm going to just filter that somewhat through that screen there. Now there's a couple of different things you could do when you're making a candle out of tallow. You can actually put some scent oils, like the Scentsy, I think they're called, scent oils. You can throw those into the tallow before you go to pour your candle. But if you do not put those in your candle, you have a potential survival food in addition to a light source. The moment you throw the oils in there for a scented candle, it's pretty much a candle. So here's the 2 little strips I've cut. I just want to see how this is going to work. I'm going to put 2 of these strips in there, and I'm going to put 2 of the normal wicks that I use the 2-ply cordage with, and just see how those function. Alright, important to remember if you're going to be pouring more than one of these, is that the tallow will have set up on your screen, so you don't want to pour directly over the top of that last pour. You want to pour on a new section of the screen. This is just going to help catch any little bits that I wasn't able to separate out of the last few boils I've done. You can see how there's a lot of gunk coming out right at the bottom there. This screen's just going to allow me to extract every little bit of tallow that I can out of this to make these candles. And that's it. Alright guys, here's one fairly large Tupperware container, about 2 inches full of tallow. That'll go in my freezer, ready to go for any time I need it. This large candle here will be going out to my permanent shelter once I get it finished, and it'll sit out there ready for any kind of reading or anything else I want to do, or if I get really hungry and starving, I could always eat it. You can do it a little more quickly than what I did, but you're not going to have the same amount of output from the same resources that you put in. So if you really want to extract and render out every usable bit of tallow, it's a lot better to render slowly than, you know, throwing this thing in boiling water for 20 minutes and thinking you've got all of it. Because just like in a slow cooker, you're breaking down that connective tissue, you're breaking down the cells, the lining of those cells, the longer you cook it. So cook at a low temp for a long period of time, you're going to bust all those cells open and let all that fat flow to the top. I've got easily 5 pounds of pure tallow after all my filterings and everything out of that animal, out of that small doe. So it's certainly a viable resource. It's an excellent resource. I've got enough tallow to last me all year.